The National Gallery in Trafalgar Square in London was opened in 1838. Views of the art of the past are enshrined in galleries and museums of art. Yet views about art change, and over the century the National Gallery changed a great deal. Apart, that is, from the neoclassical facade designed by William Wilkins. Originally, the National Gallery occupied only the west wing of the building. Its collection included the art of many countries as well as recent British art. The east wing housed the Royal Academy. There the work of contemporary artists was assessed by critics and public at the annual exhibition, represented in this painting Public Opinion of 1863 by George Bernard O'Neill. The Royal Academy was not moved to its present site in Piccadilly until 1869. In the National Gallery itself, not only did the arrangement of the rooms change, but so did the collection itself. Why certain pictures entered the collection and when can tell us about Victorian attitudes to the art of the past. In turn, those attitudes can tell us about how the Victorians saw themselves. A crucial point about the National Gallery is that it had been set up as a public collection that was to be open to all and so didn't charge admission. It was open to the general public from Monday to Thursday. On Fridays and Saturdays, it was only open to students of art and artists who came to study. Contemporary reports stress that the National Gallery was both intended for enjoyment and improvement. Its purpose was to inform and to instruct. This sketch of the interior of the gallery was one of several done by an artist called Tidmarsh in the 1880s. He showed artists working on copies, as well as visitors strolling through the galleries. These figures were drawn from the middle and upper-class public who visited the gallery. One commentator wrote in 1858 that it was those engaged in the professions and in the higher walks of trade and commercial life that were the staunchest supporters of art. Tidmarsh only shows us images of middle-class visitors, yet a Parliamentary Select Committee report of 1836 had made it clear that the gallery was also intended for the manufacturing population. Artisans, it was thought, would improve their skills by studying approved specimens of art. This would lead to improvements in design standards and thus in trade. Particular works of art could provide models, and in a more general way, it was thought that great art would inculcate taste into the gallery-goer of every class. Much later, in the 1870s, the weekly illustrated paper The Graphic reproduced two engravings which showed the lower classes in the gallery. Here this family group is depicted as being rather ill at ease, compared with the fashionable figures on the left. Here the working men are shown keenly concentrating, even bowed before the work of art they study. This is an image of a party of working men, guided through the gallery by what the Graphic called an explanatory gentleman. He was appointed to the task by the Working Men's Club and Institute Union. Without such guidance, the Graphic of 1870 continued, if you turn an average working man loose in the National Gallery, he is apt to come away more puzzled than profited. The Barry rooms, which Tidmarsh sketched, were not opened until 1876. They were built on the site of St. Martin's Workhouse, which used to stand behind the east wing of the building, but which was pulled down to make way for the new extension. Before that, the gallery backed on to the old workhouse, a site of poverty and degradation. The location of the National Gallery had drawn a great deal of comment from the start. This satirical print dates from the 1830s and shows the gallery under construction. Brawling figures are depicted against hoardings advertising the broad diversity of public events and amusements on offer in the city. The new building, a temple to art, rises out of chaos. The title, Cross Readings in Charing Cross, plays on the conflicting messages coming from the hoardings, as well, it might be argued, as the conflicting image of the temple to art in the midst of this urban confusion. Such goings-on in the insalubrious area around Charing Cross actually obstruct the respectable woman on the far right from reaching the gallery. It soon became clear that the gallery was not big enough to house the collection. The solution was either to extend the existing building, which is in the end what happened, or to move. A commission appointed to look into the state of the pictures in the gallery reported,
"Our attention was drawn to the vicinity of several large chimneys, particularly that of the baths and washhouses, and that connected with the steam engines by which the fountains in Trafalgar Square are worked, from which great volumes of smoke are emitted."
St Martin's Baths were behind the gallery in Orange Street. These were one of the first public baths to be opened in London in 1849. They were intended to improve standards of hygiene amongst the poor of the area. They offered facilities for bathing and washing, and a central feature of the design of baths and washhouses was a huge chimney from which foul air, smoke and vapour were expelled. The St Martin's chimney is just visible behind the National Gallery in this print of 1852. There was concern about smoke and pollution causing damage to the pictures. Yet in general, the smoke, the steam engines and the dirt are not depicted in contemporary engravings. Such details were deemed inappropriate to a representation of the National Gallery as the site of a major national collection that had to compete for prestige with the great museums of Europe. The National Gallery was situated at the top of Trafalgar Square, a model urban improvement of the mid-century. Nelson's column had been added in the 1840s as a memorial to Lord Nelson, hero of empire. And the whole was a showpiece to national greatness, an arena for spectacle, as represented here in the memorial of the marriage of the Prince of Wales in 1863. The function and effect of the layout of Trafalgar Square was to link culture and empire. The central position had the advantage of being accessible to a broad public, but the 1850 commissioners reported the problems that brought with it.
The gallery is frequently crowded by large masses of people, consisting not merely of those who come for the purposes of seeing the pictures, but also of persons having obviously for their object the use of rooms for wholly different purposes, either for shelter in case of bad weather, or as a place in which children of all ages may recreate and play.
If some people were coming to the gallery for what were seen as the wrong reasons, then what were the right ones? If one of the right reasons to visit the gallery was to be educated and improved, then how could the collection best do that job? Could it be done by presenting to the public only what contemporaries considered to be good pictures? Or should it be done by showing both good and bad pictures for the sake of historical accuracy? Competing Victorian views of the art of the past are clearly shown in the controversies surrounding one small part of the collection, the acquisition of paintings of the early Italian school, that is, before about 1500. Many of these pictures came into the collection during the 1850s. These early Italians were amongst those known as primitives. The term loosely covered medieval and early Renaissance artists, artists before Raphael, who the Victorians held up as a model of perfection. Raphael's St. Catherine dates from 1509, and the Victorians valued the treatment of light and shade, the three-dimensional pose, and the sense of recession in space. One of the Italian primitive works to come into the collection was this Coronation of the Virgin. It's a 14th century painting in the style of Orcagna. The Victorian reactions to works of this type involved ideas about historical progress as well as anti-Catholic feeling. In 1858, a writer on art called J.P. Davis echoed earlier hostility to these primitive productions,
whose subjects consist for the most part of legendary absurdities, or scriptural illustrations in which profane attempts to personify the deity and the general travesty of whatever we hold sacred is absolutely revolting.
The two outer panels of adoring saints were the first paintings by the so-called primitives to be acquired by the gallery in 1848. The central panel of the altarpiece, which depicts the coronation of the Virgin, was thought to be lost but was acquired later. National Gallery pictures are numbered in the order in which they enter the collection. The two outside panels are numbered 215 and 216, and the central panel 1897. So, just looking at the numbers on the labels can tell you that the adoring saints were acquired early on. Working out what was acquired when and why can reveal a great deal about Victorian tastes. These pictures are by the painter Lorenzo Monaco and are now thought to date from the early 1400s, although when they were given to the gallery by William Conyngham, they were thought to be by an even earlier painter working in the 1300s. Conyngham stressed that they were of a much earlier period than any of the pictures then in the gallery. The gallery's buying policy was a matter of public expenditure and was seen to be of... The Whig politician Lord John Russell even spoke in the House of Commons in a debate on the National Gallery in March 1853 and called in particular for the acquisition of works by the early Italian painters. It was Sir Charles Eastlake who played perhaps the most important role in acquiring these works for the collection, as keeper during the 1840s, as trustee during the early 1850s, and as director of the National Gallery from 1855. He was also president of the Royal Academy, so an extremely powerful figure in the Victorian art establishment. He was responsible for the collection when this picture in the style of Orcagna was bought. He stated,
"While it is desirable that a museum of pictures could, in its completeness, contain examples of every school and period, it by no means follows that all such examples are fit objects of study for the young artist."
There we have it in a nutshell. A national collection had to be representative of art history for the sake of historical accuracy and completeness, but only certain periods and styles were appropriate models for the present day. That wasn't merely an academic point. It had to do with the original conflict of ideas as to whom and what the gallery was actually for. It was partly meant to provide models which artists and artisans should emulate, and partly meant to enable an historical understanding of the past. Painters should not learn how to paint from a picture like this, but rather, as the Art Journal put it, learn what to avoid. That was the lesson, it was argued, the Pre-Raphaelites failed to learn in their willful adoption of archaic devices. The flat gold halo, the symbolism used here by Rossetti in his painting Ecce Ancilla Domini, exhibited in 1850. Those who welcomed the early Italian paintings as models for contemporary pre-Raphaelite work, like Rossetti's, generally opposed the style of painting Eastlake himself had become famous for. The idealized sweet faces in warm, mellow tones of his Christ Blessing Little Children of 1839 recalled aspects of the Italian tradition after Raphael. The painter William Dyce, for example, learnt a great deal from the early Italian masters. He had long been interested in their techniques, shown here in one of the frescoes he painted for All Saints' Church, Margaret Street. Despite Eastlake's acquisition of early Italian art, Dyce was a fierce critic of his attitudes to the primitives and of his running of the National Gallery. In 1853, he wrote and published a long letter to Prince Albert chronicling his complaints. In his letter, Dyce implied that the National Gallery was merely a miscellaneous and fortuitous assemblage of pictures placed together without order or arrangement on any recognizable plan. Today, the collection is organized on the basis of national schools, but in 1853, the pictures were still arranged in a haphazard way. Dyce thought that the pictures should be displayed systematically, by school and in chronological order. This would show that there was a progression, which began with the early work of, say, Duccio, which represented the infancy of art. From there, art did not leap forward suddenly to maturity, but moved in stages. The early stages were marked for Dyce by an innocent simplicity and truthfulness, to be found in works like Fra Angelico's Christ Glorified in the Court of Heaven. Dyce thought that art went through a period of adolescence, exemplified here by an altarpiece painted by Raphael's master Perugino in the early 1500s. Perugino, with his sweet faces, was a popular artist for the Victorians. Dyce believed that it was through this adolescence that art reached its manhood in the work of Raphael. Dyce's view was different from Eastlake's because he drew a distinction between these technical advances and other artistic values. Unlike Eastlake, Dyce saw strength in simplicity and valued the early stages of art for their own sake. Dyce's opponent, Davis, who you'll remember described the early works as absolutely revolting, took a more extreme line than Eastlake. Davis saw Dyce's comments as tantamount to saying, the worse the execution, the better the picture. This small triptych by the Sienese painter Duccio was one of the pictures from the collection of two Italian noblemen, Lombardi and Baldi, bought by the National Gallery in 1857. A Madonna and Child with Saints, it was painted in about 1300. Eastlake saw this picture as important because of Duccio's influence on the progress of 14th century art. His difference with Dyce was that he denied it any status as a model for present-day artists. The art critic Ruskin went further. He agreed with Dyce that the collection should be hung by school and chronologically. He also, in 1857, as a witness for yet another parliamentary commission on the National Gallery, objected to the conventional Victorian manner of piling pictures one on top of the other. He suggested pictures should be hung in single rows, 2 at the most. The Coronation of the Virgin in the style of Orcagna was also bought as part of the Lombardi-Baldi collection in 1857. Like Dyce, Ruskin opposed Eastlake, but for even more fundamental reasons. For Ruskin, Orcagna did not mark an early stage in a process whereby art moved forward according to the laws of progress. Ruskin wrote that the change from the 13th century to the present day
was not that of a child into the man as we usually consider it, but was that of the chrysalis into butterfly. There was an entire change in the habits, food, method of existence, and heart of the whole creature. That we know more is certainly true, but that is not the essential difference between us and them. We are a different kind of creature from them, as different as moths are different from caterpillars.
Ruskin rejected the view put forward in the Select Committee report of 1853. This report had stated that the earlier works were important primarily because they showed art in its rise and progress in a way that confirmed its later perfection. Raphael's Ansidei Madonna was later bought for the collection with a parliamentary grant in 1885. Although this is a rather later example, it shows how Raphael continued to be seen to embody that perfection. The drapes surrounding the new acquisition imply an almost sacred status in this sketch by Tidmarsh from the 1880s. Ruskin taught an alternative view of artistic change to students at the Working Men's College in Great Ormond Street, set up in the 1850s. He taught, for instance, that Fra Angelico, like Orcagna, was an artist of the great age of faith, who used colour and gesture to give perhaps the best idea of spiritual being which the human mind is capable of forming. After the great age of faith, art and society deteriorated in unison. It was Ruskin's view of the present as decadent, corrupt, and profane that led him to attribute such status to a work like this. This was in direct contrast to Eastlake's image of both past and present. When asked in 1857 whether his working men preferred looking at art before or after Raphael, Ruskin replied that they would not be allowed to look at the art of a later decadent school.
I teach them so much love of detail that the moment they see a detail carefully drawn, they are caught by it.
Sir Charles Eastlake, on the other hand, saw all the works in the collection as contributing to the dominant Victorian view of progress, even this early Madonna and Child enthroned by a 13th century painter called Margaritone of Arezzo. It was bought with the Lombardi-Baldi collection, and thus of course with public money, and Eastlake had to justify its purchase.
The unsightly specimens of Margaritone and the earliest Tuscan painters were selected solely for their historical importance, and as showing the rude beginnings from which, through nearly 2 centuries and a half, Italian art slowly advanced to the period of Raphael and his contemporaries.
And from there, he believed art progressed to the present day. Eastlake saw history in terms of an unenlightened feudal period leading progressively to an enlightened present. The picture for Eastlake was full of affectation and grimace, but it could teach an important point about progress. The Victorians held differing views of the art of the past. These views were not neutral or value-free, but dependent on differing interests and motivated by attitudes to the present. Paintings by Italian primitives had been bought by private collectors before 1850, but the controversies surrounding their acquisition by the National Gallery had to do with the functions of a public collection that should inform and instruct. The collection represented a construction of the past that was rooted in the present, in a setting built to show the greatness of the nation.